The tires crunched over the gravel driveway as I pulled up to the Hartford estate, the air just sharp enough to remind me it was late September in Bluebridge. My body ached from the 10-day field shoot in Montana, hiking through canyons, crouching in brush, dodging sudden rainstorms, but I'd promised Spencer I'd be here. His mother, Margot, turned 60 tonight, and attendance wasn't optional. Not for me. I killed the engine and sat for a moment in the fading light. The windows glowed warmly behind the lace curtains, a lie of comfort. The house always reminded me of one of those museum displays, flawless, staged, slightly too cold to feel real. I slipped out of the car, brushed dust from my jeans, and forced a small smile onto my lips as I walked toward the front door. Inside, the air was thick with roasted meats, lilies, and some kind of spice I couldn't place. Margot greeted me in the kitchen, already in full hostess mode, ivory cashmere dress, flawless makeup, hair pulled into a low twist. "Camille," she said, drawing out the syllables like she wasn't quite sure they belonged to a real person. "You made it. You look rugged." I bit back the retort. "Montana will do that to you." "Of course," she said with a clipped laugh. "Let me get you a drink. You must be exhausted." She turned to the marble-topped island, lifting a crystal pitcher filled with deep red sangria. "A special blend," she said, pouring it into a glass with slow ceremony. "It'll help you relax. You seem tense." That word, relax, hit strangely. I wasn't prone to paranoia, but the way she watched me as she slid the glass across the counter made the hairs on the back of my neck lift. Something in her tone, in the glint of satisfaction behind her smile, made me hesitate. Douglas entered then, humming to himself, moving toward the glasses. "Is that the sangria?" he asked, picking up the glass that Margot had poured. Margot opened her mouth, a flicker of something panic, crossing her face, but I stepped in. "Actually," I said quickly, "that one's mine." I picked up the glass she hadn't touched and held it out to him. "Take this one. I think this one had more fruit anyway." He shrugged and took a sip, unbothered. Margot's jaw tightened for just a second, then she smoothed it over. "Well, I suppose it doesn't matter," she said. "I'll pour you a new one." Dinner passed with the usual undercurrent of tension, Margot's subtle digs about my unconventional career, her thinly veiled comments about Spencer's future, and the performative smiles she gave the rest of the guests. I managed small talk with Miles and Delia, her other children, while glancing occasionally at Douglas, who seemed to grow quieter and paler with each course. It happened as dessert was being cleared. Douglas had been sipping the sangria steadily, and just as Margot raised a toast, his hand jerked suddenly, the glass slipping from his fingers and shattering on the table's edge. Everyone turned as he swayed in his seat, eyes unfocused, breath shallow. Then he slumped sideways, knocking over a chair. Gasps filled the room. Delia screamed. Margot rushed to his side, barking at Miles to call 911. Spencer froze, and I stepped forward, heart pounding but face calm. "I'll get a cold cloth," I offered, disappearing into the kitchen. But I wasn't looking for cloth. I was looking for that first glass. The one Margot poured with such intention. It was still there, untouched. I wrapped it carefully in a kitchen towel, slid it into my oversized tote beneath my camera gear, and returned to the dining room as paramedics wheeled in, checking Douglas's vitals. "He's had low blood pressure before," Margot said quickly, hands fluttering. "He might have stood too fast earlier," I told him to hydrate. The rest of the evening was chaos, paramedics stabilizing Douglas, guests murmuring reassurances, Margot giving the performance of a worried wife. But I watched her face. Not the panic of a woman afraid for her husband. No, this was something else. Fear. But not for him. For something unraveling. Spencer offered to ride to the hospital, but Margot insisted she would go alone. "Stay," she told him firmly. "Enjoy your evening. I'll keep you updated." He looked torn, but relented. I made my exit soon after, citing exhaustion. As I drove home through the winding roads of Bluebridge, my hands tightened on the wheel. The glass was wrapped securely in the back seat. I didn't know what exactly she'd put in it, But I knew this much. She hadn't intended for Douglas to drink it. That look on her face when he picked up the glass? That wasn't surprise. That was dread. And whatever her plan was, it had just backfired. The stars were brilliant overhead as I pulled into my driveway, but I barely saw them. My mind was already racing ahead. Tomorrow, I would take the glass to someone I trusted. Someone who could tell me exactly what had been in that special sangria. Because this wasn't just about a drink. This was about control. And Margot Hartford had just made a mistake. One I wasn't about to let her recover from. The next morning, I stared at the glass resting on my kitchen counter, wrapped in the same towel I'd bundled it in the night before. The sun streamed through the windows, catching tiny flecks of fruit pulp stuck to the rim, and the deep red stain of sangria that clung to the bottom. It looked so innocuous. But my instinct said otherwise. Margot had meant for me to drink it, and now Douglas was recovering in a hospital bed while Margot tried to spin it all into coincidence. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I landed on Dr. Elliot Tran. We'd met 3 years ago during a wildlife shoot for an environmental nonprofit. He was a toxicologist, the type who spent more time in labs than in daylight, but his dry humor and sharp mind made him unforgettable. I hit call. "Camille Rowe," he answered, a surprise in his voice. "Long time. You haven't fallen into a canyon, have you?" "Not yet," I said. "But I have a favor. One I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." There was a pause. "Tell me where and when." I met Elliot at his lab just past noon. The building was tucked between a dental office and an unassuming bookstore. Only a small placard on the door marked it as a private toxicology lab. He ushered me in without questions, but his eyebrows lifted when I revealed the glass. "Looks like sangria," he said, examining it. "What am I looking for?" "Anything that shouldn't be in there," I said. "Specifically, anything that would make someone collapse." He didn't press further. He was the kind of professional who knew when curiosity could cost trust. "Give me a few hours." Back home, I tried to distract myself by editing the backlog of wildlife photos from Montana. Grizzlies in the dusk, elk bugling in a misty ravine, hawks mid-flight. Normally, the rhythm of color correction and cropping soothed me. Today, it didn't. My mind was back at that dinner table, watching Margot's face when Douglas drank the wrong glass. By 5 o'clock, my phone buzzed. "Elliot." "Camille," he said, voice sharper than usual. That drink was laced with diazepam. A strong dose. Enough to impair motor function. Mix it with alcohol and, well, you saw what happened. I swallowed hard. So it wasn't just me being paranoid. Not even a little. He emailed me the report, a clean, clinical breakdown of the chemical components, dosage estimates, and toxicity level. I read it twice. Then I read it again. That night, I sat on the couch, laptop open, and began digging. If Margot had access to benzodiazepines, there had to be a trail. Prescriptions, pharmacy records, something. I wasn't a detective, but years of wildlife photography had taught me to observe patterns, follow signs others missed. It didn't take long to uncover the whispers. A few blogs about the Bluebridge Country Club surfaced, gossip threads where usernames speculated about Margot Hartford's occasional meltdowns, her sudden hostility, strange incidents involving other women quietly stepping back from club events. I reached out to a former acquaintance, Fiona Mendez, who'd resigned from the club board abruptly last year. We'd met briefly at a gallery event, and while we were hardly friends, she responded quickly when I mentioned Margot. "Let me guess," she said during our call, "something odd happened, and now you're wondering if it wasn't so random?" "Yes," I replied. "Do you know if she ever drugged anyone?" "I can't say that," Fiona said cautiously. "But she's always had an arsenal of pills and a need to control everything around her." I left the board after she sabotaged a fundraiser I was chairing, spread a rumor I mismanaged funds. It nearly ruined my reputation. Why would she do that? She didn't like that I suggested we modernize the club's bylaws. Said it gave too much freedom to people who hadn't earned it. It wasn't just me then. Over the next few days, I compiled everything: Elliot's toxicology report, screenshots of those threads, Fiona's email where she detailed her experience, and even a partial prescription record I found online through a data breach site. Margot had filled at least 3 different benzodiazepine prescriptions over the past 6 months. I created a folder on my desktop, MH Evidence. But evidence wasn't enough. Not yet. I knew Margot's power didn't just come from manipulation, it came from the silence that followed. People didn't confront her because it was easier to let her reign quietly. She cloaked cruelty in pearls and posture. But I wasn't built to play that game. Still, I had to be smart. I rehearsed my next steps like I was planning an ambush in the wild. I'd confront her soon. But not with rage, not with emotion. Just the facts. The report. The trail. Let her explain herself when the controls started slipping through her fingers. Before I closed my laptop for the night, I backed everything up to a cloud drive and sent a copy to my own email. Just in case. When I crawled into bed beside Spencer, he was already asleep. His breathing was steady, his arm draped carelessly across the pillow. I stared at the ceiling. He didn't know yet. About the sangria. About what his mother tried to do. I wasn't sure how to tell him not yet. But I would. Soon. The truth was rising. And this time, I had the evidence to drag it into the light. Margot's invitation came wrapped in silk ribbon and smugness. A casual photoshoot, she called it in her note. The autumn light is just divine this time of year, and I thought we could spend a little quality time, just us girls. Beneath her scripted handwriting, I could almost hear the smile she wore when she penned it, saccharine and brittle. I stared at the card for a while before placing it beside the folder labeled MH Evidence. I wasn't going for a photoshoot. I was going for the truth. The day was crisp, the kind of early October chill that burned faintly through a fleece jacket. I arrived at the Hartford estate just before golden hour, camera bag slung over one shoulder, but it wasn't filled with lenses today. Inside, I carried the toxicology report, printed copies of her prescriptions, Fiona's email, and a growing resolve to stop pretending I didn't see what she was doing. Margot answered the door herself, of course. Her hair was pinned back in an effortless twist, and she wore a soft blush wool sweater that probably cost more than my rent in college. "Camille," she said brightly, stepping aside. "I brewed some spiced tea. Figured you'd be chilled from the drive." She always started sweet. The poison never came first. I followed her into the sunroom, light filtering through the windows and golden shafts that touched the edge of her tasteful furniture. A tray of tea and tiny scones rested on the table. "I thought we'd do some portraits out near the birch trees," she said, handing me a teacup. I didn't take it. "Actually," I said, "I'm not here to shoot today." Her hand hovered for a second, then withdrew. She set the cup down carefully, like it mattered. "Oh, trouble with the equipment." "No, trouble with trust." Her expression didn't shift, not even a crack. That was always the most unnerving part of Margot. She could look serene as a lake even when the water underneath was churning with venom. I pulled the report from my bag and laid it flat on the table. "I had the sangria tested. The one you poured me at your birthday dinner." Her eyes moved to the page, slowly, methodically. "Still, no change." "Diazepam," I said. "High dosage. Enough to impair someone significantly. The glass you poured for me, the one Douglas ended up drinking." She picked up the sheet like it was a menu at brunch. Scanned it. Folded it neatly. "Camille, darling. I'm sure you think you're onto something dramatic. But you've clearly misunderstood." "No," I said, firmer now. "I haven't. I know what you did. And I know why." She sighed, as if this were all a tedious inconvenience. "You're blowing things out of proportion. It was nothing dangerous. I wanted you to rest. That's all. You've looked so frayed lately." "You drugged me," I said flatly. "You drugged me so I'd miss my gallery opening. So I'd look unreliable. To Spencer. To his friends. To the community." Her mask cracked for the first time. Just slightly. A flicker of something cold and razor-sharp passed through her eyes. "You've been very fortunate, Camille," she said, voice dropping an octave. "A decent career, a charming smile, a husband with a name people respect. But don't confuse being welcomed into a family with actually belonging to it. I leaned forward. This isn't a club. This is a marriage. And I belong wherever Spencer and I decide to build our life. Not where you dictate from your velvet throne. She stood abruptly, smoothing her sweater. You're threatening me now? No. I'm warning you. I pulled out the rest of the folder, the screenshots, the prescription record, the gossip threads, Fiona's email. Next time you try to undermine me, I will not keep this between us. The truth has a way of slipping through cracks, Margot. And yours are starting to show. Her mouth pressed into a hard line. Spencer will never believe you. Maybe, I said. But Delia might. Miles might. Your friends at the club might. And if not them, then the board at Douglas's company. Or the police. It doesn't really matter where I start. She crossed her arms. For the first time, she didn't speak. I didn't come here for an apology, I continued. I came here to make it clear, I see you. I know what you're doing. And I'm done playing nice. Margot slowly lowered herself into the armchair beside the fireplace, like a queen returning to her throne. You have spirit, she said at last. Too much of it. That's always been the problem with women like you. I gave a small, bitter laugh. And the problem with women like you, Margot, is thinking you'll always win just because you play dirty. We sat in silence for a few seconds, long enough for the sun to drop below the horizon, casting the room in pale shadow. Finally, I stood and slung my bag over my shoulder. We're done here. Try me again, and I won't keep your secrets anymore. I walked out without another word, my boots echoing against her pristine hallway. The wind had picked up outside, stirring the birch trees into a soft rustle as I reached my car. Behind me, the estate loomed, full of expensive silence. But I didn't look back. The game had changed. And now I wasn't just surviving it. I was rewriting the rules. It started with whispers I couldn't hear, but I could feel. The kind of silence that follows a slammed door or a lie spoken loud enough to echo through people's perceptions. At first, it was subtle. Spencer began pausing longer before answering my questions. He stayed later at work. He stopped mentioning dinner at his parents' house, even though I knew he was still going. I wasn't surprised. Margot didn't waste time. After our confrontation, I knew she wouldn't come at me directly again. No, she'd play the long game, paint me unstable, emotional, dramatic. And she had years of social currency to back it up. A reputation polished with charity events, galas, and smiling Christmas cards. All it took was a well-placed comment to a friend of a friend. I'm worried about Camille. She seems fragile lately. And suddenly, people looked at me differently. At the cafe where I worked on photo edits, the barista who used to ask about my travels now avoided eye contact. At the market, I caught the wife of one of Spencer's colleagues staring at me just a beat too long before turning away. Even at my gallery, patrons who once complimented my work now smiled with something that felt more like pity than admiration. But it was Spencer's shift that cut deepest. One night, he came home late. I was on the couch, my laptop open but forgotten. I had been trying to piece together a timeline of Margot's manipulations, but I hadn't typed anything in over an hour. Hey, he said as he dropped his keys. You're up. Hard to sleep when your husband avoids coming home, I said without looking at him. He didn't respond right away. Just loosened his tie and sat down across from me. Camille, my mom told me you confronted her. Said you accused her of trying to poison you. I met his eyes. I didn't accuse her. I presented evidence. Lab confirmed diazepam in the drink she gave me, which Douglas drank instead, and look what happened. Spencer rubbed the back of his neck, tension in every line of his body. She said you've been paranoid. That you've been stressed since Montana. That you're projecting things that aren't real. I stood, heart pounding. You think I imagined this? I grabbed the folder from the table and held it out. Spencer, it's all here. The report. The dosage. Her prescriptions. Do you think I'm making this up? That I forged medical data? I don't know, he said quietly, which hurt worse than anything. It just doesn't sound like her. She's my mother. And I'm your wife, I snapped. Do you trust me at all? He looked at me, really looked, and for a moment I saw the war playing out inside him. Loyalty to the woman who raised him versus the woman he chose. "I need time," he said. And just like that, I felt the chasm open between us. He started sleeping in the guest room 2 nights a week. Work trips lasted longer. I stopped texting him every time I uncovered another breadcrumb because he stopped responding. I felt the loneliness settle around me like fog. Not a sudden crash, but a slow and steady hush, wrapping around my life until every movement felt muffled. One evening, I passed Margot at the florist. She was holding a bouquet of white lilies, speaking with the owner like nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. She turned and saw me, and for the briefest second, her lips curled. Not into a smile, into something smaller, smugger. She knew what she was doing. She didn't need to fight me. She just needed to outlast me. The worst part was, I couldn't go public. Not yet. Not without something irrefutable. A toxicology report could be argued. Motive could be denied. What I needed was proof of intent. Until then, my word meant nothing against Margot's practiced charm. Delia called once, asking if I was all right. Her tone was uncertain, as if she was trying to decide whether I was someone to believe or someone to gently avoid. I told her I was fine. I lied. My photography started slipping. I missed a deadline. Forgot a meeting with a local conservation group. The world had grown distorted, like I was trying to walk underwater. One night, I sat at my desk, staring at an image I'd taken months ago, a fox, mid-leap, suspended between snow and sky. Perfectly in focus. Perfectly timed. I used to feel like that, sharp, sure, caught in the right moment. Now I felt like the blurred background. Margot wanted me to unravel, to doubt myself. And maybe for a few weeks, I did. But something inside me refused to break. I wasn't done. I hadn't come this far to be silenced by whispers and sidelong glances. If I had to wait in the shadows, I would. But not in defeat. In patience. Because one day, something would slip. And when it did, I'd be ready. The package came on a Tuesday. No return address. No note. Just a small padded envelope tucked between a pile of mail, catalogs, a utility bill, some charity solicitation with a picture of a sad-eyed dog. I almost didn't notice it, but something about its weight made me pause. Not heavy, but intentional. I closed the door behind me and peeled off my jacket, my fingers already tugging at the seal. Inside was a flash drive, slim and black, with no markings. I stared at it for a moment, pulse climbing. There was only one person I hadn't heard from in weeks who would know enough to send something like this. Delia. I didn't even take off my shoes. I went straight to my laptop, inserted the drive, and held my breath. The folder opened with a single click. No name, just video files, time-stamped, each one dated around the night of Margot's birthday dinner. I clicked the first. It was grainy, but the view was clear, Margot's kitchen. The footage had been captured by a home security camera tucked into the corner of the ceiling, probably meant for general monitoring. But it captured everything. Margot at the counter, carefully pouring sangria into a glass. Then reaching into her cardigan pocket and removing a small vial. She tilted it, just slightly, over the rim. A few drops. That was all. She glanced over her shoulder before setting the glass precisely on the tray. The screen froze in my mind. There it was. Intent. No more guessing. I clicked to the next video. Douglas entering. Margot offering the drink. The hesitation on her face when he picked up the wrong glass. The moment he drank it. Her tightly clenched fists. I swallowed hard, bile rising. Then came the final clip. The date stamp was later, hours after the dinner. It showed Margot and Douglas standing in the kitchen. He was shouting, though the camera didn't have sound. His face was flushed with anger, his hands flailing. He pointed toward the counter. Toward the glasses. Margot was still. Cold. She said something short, cutting. He paced. Then he stopped and jabbed a finger toward her chest. And then, he said something. It was only visible because he leaned close enough to the camera for his mouth to be seen clearly. This isn't the first time you've done this. I paused the video. Rewound. Played it again. Watched his lips form the words. My lungs felt like they'd emptied out all at once. I clicked on one final file. This one wasn't dated from the dinner. It was earlier, 2 months back. Margot and Douglas again. This time seated in the sitting room. Spencer's name came up more than once. Her lips formed his name with venom. They were planning something. She's too unpredictable, Margot mouthed. He needs someone stable. Douglas nodded, then said something I couldn't fully lip read. But I caught the words leverage and photos. They weren't just trying to manipulate me. They had been trying to sabotage my entire marriage. Strategically. Deliberately. And suddenly, the weeks of cold shoulders and hesitant glances from Spencer snapped into place. I ejected the flash drive slowly, my hands cold against the plastic. I stared at it in my palm like it was a live thing. This wasn't just evidence. This was a confession. And Delia, God, Delia had sent this. She hadn't believed me when I first hinted at Margot's games. But clearly something had shifted. Maybe she saw it in how I was being treated. Maybe she'd been watching quietly all along. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd been a victim too. I sat back on the couch, heart hammering. The air around me felt thinner, like the truth had knocked the oxygen from the room. I texted her only one word. Thank you. She replied a minute later. You're not crazy. I've known for a while. I just didn't know what to do. My fingers hovered over the screen before typing. We need to talk. Soon, she wrote. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the window. Outside, the trees were just starting to turn. The leaves burned with color, red, orange, deep gold. Change, right on time. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I felt furious. And clear. Margot hadn't just tried to drug me. She hadn't just manipulated her son. She'd been engineering narratives, crafting illusions, dismantling people from the inside out. But now I had the footage. Her own home had betrayed her. I smiled, faint and sharp. She had picked the wrong woman to try and bury. And I was about to show her just how deep I'd started digging. Once you know the trick, it's easier to spot it again. That's what kept running through my mind in the days after I watched those videos over and over, each time feeling both sickened and strangely studied. The footage didn't just give me proof, it gave me clarity. Margot didn't act out of impulse. Her sabotage was habitual, methodical. And if this had happened to me, to Spencer, to our marriage, then it had happened before. I started with Spencer's ex, Noah. They'd dated for 2 years back in college and even lived together for a while. I hadn't thought of him in ages, but the memory of Spencer's curt mentions had always carried a bitter undertone. It didn't work out, he used to say, brushing it off with a shrug that felt rehearsed. But now I wondered who had really ended it. It took a few tries to find Noah, his number had changed, and he'd moved to Burlington. When I finally reached him through an old mutual friend and explained who I was, his voice tightened immediately. Camille Rowe, he said slowly. You're Spencer's wife. I am, I said, careful. I know this is a strange call, but I need to ask you something. It's about his parents. Specifically, Margot. A long pause stretched over the line, then a bitter laugh. I was wondering when someone would call me about her. My stomach turned. So, it wasn't just me. No, he said. It wasn't. I didn't know what she was doing at the time, not fully. But I knew something was off. Suddenly, Spencer stopped trusting me. He'd get weird about texts I never sent, emails I never wrote. Then one day he accused me of hiding things, said I was working against him. I found fake messages on his phone. Messages supposedly for me. But I never wrote them. My heart hammered. Did you confront her? I tried. She smiled and said she was just protecting her son from unnecessary hurt. Spencer never believed me. Not fully. And I didn't have proof. I thanked him and hung up, anger boiling just beneath my ribs. It was the same playbook. Margot created division, sowed doubt, made it impossible for Spencer to know what was real. And she always worked in the shadows. Fueled by Noah's story, I started reaching out to others, old friends of Spencer's, old flames, even former colleagues who had drifted out of his life with little explanation. One by one, a pattern began to form. A woman named Lacey told me she'd dated Spencer briefly after grad school. I liked him, she said over coffee, her brows furrowed. But it got weird fast. His mom invited me to lunch alone and told me she'd heard I had problems with impulsivity. That I'd been fired from 2 jobs. None of it was true, but it shook me. She was so confident, so sure of herself. I didn't want to cause trouble, so I backed off. Another friend, Alex, said he'd tried to encourage Spencer to start his own photography studio years ago. He was excited about it at first. Then out of nowhere, he shut the idea down. Said it wasn't practical. I always thought it was odd. He'd seemed so passionate about it. But I heard from someone at the time that his parents weren't supportive. They weren't just unsupportive. They were sabotage artists. Every account followed the same trajectory: enthusiasm, then interference, then retreat. Margot and Douglas moved like smoke. Hard to catch, harder to prove. But now I had enough stories, enough voices, to draw a map of their manipulation. I began compiling everything. A document so thick I had to start organizing it by category: personal relationships, professional interference, psychological undermining. It was exhausting, but it felt like regaining pieces of myself. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the walls closing in. They had been closing in. Delia texted me late one night. "Did you find what you needed?" I sent a photo of the file folder on my desk, labeled in thick black ink, the Hartford pattern. "I found everything." She replied with a single sentence. "Then it's time they saw it, too." I sat back in my chair, fingers tingling. It was time. Spencer deserved to see the full picture, not just what Margot had done to me, but what she'd done to him and to everyone before me. This wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about liberating him from a lifetime of subtle chains he didn't even know he was wearing. And maybe, just maybe, it would help him see that the distance between us hadn't started with me. It had started long before I arrived. I chose a Sunday evening. Neutral, quiet, unassuming. No big announcements. No tension-heavy invitations. Just a simple message in the family group chat: dinner at our place. Just us. Casual. Spencer replied with a thumbs up. Miles sent, "Sounds good." Delia didn't say anything right away, but a few minutes later, I saw the typing bubble appear, then disappear, then appear again. Finally, "We'll be there." I didn't sleep the night before. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car sliding down the road outside, and Spencer's breathing beside me. Even then, part of me wasn't sure which version of him would sit across from me at dinner: the husband who'd stood beside me through jungle storms and quiet heartbreaks, or the son who still believed his mother's lies before his own wife's truth. But this had to be done. The illusion needed to end. I set the table simply: no candles, no linen napkins, just food I knew they liked. A chicken roast with rosemary and garlic, roasted vegetables, and my grandmother's lemon orzo recipe that Spencer always asked for when he needed comfort, but didn't know how to say it aloud. They arrived one by one. Miles came first, always early, arms full of wine and some new IPA he'd discovered. Delia followed close behind, face unreadable, her steps quiet, like she was walking into a courtroom. Spencer came last, keys jangling in his hand, eyes scanning me like I might vanish if he blinked. We made small talk at first. How work was going. If the foliage would peak early this year. Delia complimented the orzo. Spencer smiled, tight and uncertain. But I could feel it, the tension pressing between us like fog. After dinner, I didn't wait. I stood, walked over to the sideboard, and returned with the laptop. "I need to show you all something," I said. "And I need you to watch it all the way through before saying anything." Miles leaned back in his chair, frowning slightly. "What is it?" Delia already knew. She sat forward, hands laced tightly together. Spencer's face shifted, half confused, half defensive. I opened the first video file from the flash drive. The room fell silent as the footage played. Margot in the kitchen. The vial. The careful tilt of the glass. Spencer stiffened. His eyes narrowed. I clicked to the next video. The one of Douglas unknowingly drinking from the wrong glass. The moment he collapsed. The panic in Margot's body language, not fear for him, but fear of the plan unraveling. Then the final clip. Margot and Douglas arguing. His words clear and undeniable. This isn't the first time you've done this. When I paused the video, no one spoke. Miles broke the silence. Is this real? Yes, Delia said before I could. Her voice was quiet but sharp. I've seen it. I copied the footage before she wiped the drive at the house. Spencer sat forward, his hand over his mouth. She tried to drug you? Yes, I said. So I'd miss my gallery opening. So I'd seem unreliable. So people would start to doubt me. Including you. He rubbed his face like he was trying to wipe away the reality. Jesus. There's more, I said, pulling out the folder labeled the Hartford pattern. I handed it to him. Testimonies. Emails. Interviews with people she manipulated, Noah, Lacey, Alex. This has been happening for years. To anyone who got too close to helping you grow outside of their control. Spencer flipped through the papers slowly, his fingers trembling. She's been behind it all, I continued. Not just the drink. The stories. The doubt. The wedge between us. Miles shook his head. That's not possible. Dad wouldn't allow it. Delia looked at him then. Really looked. You remember when I broke off my engagement? You think that was just nerves? He frowned. You said you didn't want to move to Boston. I did want to, she said. But then Mom told Nathan I had a drinking problem. Said I hid things. He started pulling away, questioning everything I said. I didn't know how to fight it back then. I just thought, maybe I was the problem. Miles stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You never told me. Because she made sure I wouldn't. Silence settled again, heavier this time. Spencer stood, walking toward the window. I followed, staying a step behind. I didn't want to believe it, he said, voice low. I kept telling myself you were wrong. That you were stressed. That she couldn't do something like this. I reached for his hand. He let me take it. You weren't wrong, he whispered. I was just too afraid to look. Behind us, Delia said softly, so what do we do now? No one answered right away. But I knew the answer. We tell the truth. And we stop pretending silence is protection. It was Delia's idea to record it. They'll lie, she said simply, stirring honey into her tea. They've been lying for decades. But if you get it on video, if you get them cornered, it's not just your word anymore. It's theirs too. She wasn't wrong. The plan came together quickly. We wouldn't ambush them in public. That would be too easy for Margot to spin. Too performative. No, it needed to be private. Controlled. A setting where masks could slip. I chose the same place she tried to drug me, her own kitchen. I called and asked to speak with her and Douglas. I kept my voice neutral, even warm. There are some things I'd like to clear the air about. For Spencer's sake, I added. I think we've both made assumptions. She agreed, too quickly. She was still underestimating me. I arrived with a flash drive hidden in my purse and a button camera clipped inside my jacket, barely noticeable. I'd tested it 3 times with Delia and Spencer the night before. Spencer hadn't said much since the dinner. He'd listened, read everything twice, and then simply said, "Let's finish this." That was enough. Margot greeted me with her usual cool grace, dressed in a silky gray blouse and trousers sharp enough to cut. Douglas was already seated at the counter, sipping something clear over ice. His eyes, though, were less guarded than usual. I wasn't sure if that meant guilt or detachment. "Camille," Margot said smoothly, gesturing for me to sit. "I'm glad you wanted to talk. It's been a tense few weeks, hasn't it?" I gave her a tight smile and set my bag beside me on the floor. "It has. That's actually why I'm here." Douglas watched me quietly. "I think we should speak plainly," I said. "About what happened the night of your birthday. And before. And after." Margot tilted her head. "Darling, if this is about the sangria again." "I had it tested," I cut in. "And I have the footage." "The cameras you had installed for security?" "You forgot about the one in the corner of the kitchen." A flicker. Just for a moment. Her composure cracked. "Not much, but enough." Footage of what, exactly? She asked, too evenly. You spiking the drink, I said. You pouring it for me. Douglas drinking it instead. And the argument you two had after he collapsed. Douglas shifted. His jaw clenched. Margot glanced at him, then back at me. You've clearly misunderstood. I didn't misunderstand anything, I said, voice low but unwavering. Douglas told you, on camera, that it wasn't the first time you'd done this. Do you remember that? Because I do. And now he will too. She stood abruptly, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her blouse. This is absurd. You're making accusations without evidence. You're unstable, Camille. You always have been. Spencer sees it. He's told me he's worried about you. He saw the videos, I said flatly. He knows everything. Her mouth opened. Closed. Douglas looked away. I didn't come here to ask for an apology, I continued, pulling the flash drive from my purse and sliding it across the counter. I came here to deliver this. It contains everything, every file, every statement, every bit of proof we've collected. If you try to interfere in our lives again, mine, Spencer's, Delia's, I won't keep your secrets anymore. Margot's hand hovered above the flash drive like it might burn her. You're threatening us, she said, voice sharp. I'm warning you, I said. This isn't a game you win by pretending it never happened. You drugged me. You manipulated your children. You've destroyed people's reputations for sport. And it ends now. Douglas finally spoke. You've got what you wanted. You've exposed her. Fine. What more do you want? I met his eyes. I want peace. And you don't get to be a bystander anymore, Douglas. You stood next to her while she did this. And now you'll stand in the truth. He looked down at his drink. For a long time, no one moved. Margot sat again. Slower this time. The color had drained from her face, and her fingers trembled slightly against the marble counter. I underestimated you, she murmured. I leaned forward. Yes, you did. I stood, gathering my bag. You don't need to reply, I said. Just listen. Just sit in what you've done. Because this is your reckoning. And if you ever try to turn our silence into your shield again, I'll take that flash drive and send it to every contact you've ever schmoozed, every boardroom, every club, every glossy friend you used to keep your image polished. No more secrets. The silence that followed was the heaviest I'd ever felt. I walked out of the kitchen, the same way I had weeks ago. But this time, I didn't look over my shoulder. This time, I wasn't afraid. And I wasn't alone. 3 weeks passed without a word from Margot or Douglas. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. Not even a forced apology wrapped in a fruit basket. The silence was louder than any confrontation could have been, and for once, it felt like peace rather than a warning. Then, on a chilly Thursday morning, a certified letter arrived. Spencer had just come in from walking the dog, cheeks flushed pink, when he saw the envelope on the counter where I'd dropped the mail. He picked it up, read the return address, and froze. From my father's lawyer, he said. I stood beside him as he opened it, carefully sliding the letter from the thick paper sleeve. The official letterhead stared up at us, cold and stiff. His eyes scanned the first few lines quickly, then slower, more deliberately. He didn't say a word for almost a full minute. What is it? I finally asked. He looked at me, startled, as if he'd forgotten I was there, then handed the letter over. I read, my heart quickening with each word. Douglas Hartford had transferred the deed of our home to Spencer and me jointly. Not a temporary arrangement. Not held in trust. Full ownership, free and clear. There was also mention of a newly established trust fund, one designated not for us directly, but for our unborn daughter, Isla. A quiet gesture, no emotional language, no pretense of love. Just legal recognition. A shift. An acknowledgement. Spencer sank onto the arm of the couch, still holding the envelope like it might vanish. They've never done anything like this before, he said. Not without strings. Maybe that's the point, I said softly. I didn't pretend it was an apology. It wasn't a sudden transformation of heart. It was damage control, reputation management. But it was also surrender. A carefully folded white flag disguised in paperwork. They knew the game had changed. They knew we had the upper hand now, and more importantly, that we weren't afraid to use it. Spencer sat in silence for a while, the letter resting in his lap. I sat next to him, not speaking, just letting the quiet hold us for a while. They controlled everything, he said eventually, his voice low and tired. My choices, my friendships, every relationship I've ever had. I thought I was making decisions, but they were always steering. I reached for his hand. But now you know. And now you get to choose differently. He nodded slowly. I want to fix it. I want to understand how to be separate from them. Not just angry. Not just afraid of disappointing them. I want to live my own life. Our life. A few days later, he and Miles started therapy together. Delia found a counselor on her own. I watched them all take hesitant steps toward autonomy, like deer learning to walk on unfamiliar ground, legs shaky but determined. I didn't try to lead them. I just stood beside them. Margot and Douglas didn't reach out after the letter. Not even a single check-in to maintain their usual pretense. I imagined Margot retreating into her glass and lavender fortress, spinning new stories about why we were distant. But the difference now was that we weren't staying silent. We didn't need her approval. We didn't need her narrative. One afternoon, as I organized prints for my gallery launch, Spencer came into the studio holding a manila envelope. I looked up, questioning. From my dad, he said, handing it to me. Inside were several of my photographs, wildlife shots I'd taken over the last few years. Carefully printed. On the back of each, a short typed label, used with permission in company's annual report. Photo credits, Camille Rowe. There was no note. Just that. I stared at the prints, not quite sure what to make of it. It's not affection, Spencer said gently. But it's respect. And in some ways, that felt heavier. More real. More earned. He hadn't asked for my forgiveness. He hadn't tried to charm his way back into our lives. But he'd chosen to highlight my work, publicly and professionally. He didn't have to do that. I set the photos aside, unsure how I felt. But maybe it wasn't about how I felt about them anymore. Maybe it was about how I felt about myself, about having survived their games without becoming part of them. The house felt warmer these days. Not because of the weather, but because of the energy inside it. No more watching my back. No more biting my tongue. Just real conversations, small rebuilding moments with Spencer. We started cooking together again. Taking evening walks. Laughing more. There were still pauses, still wounds, but healing had finally begun. When I looked at the nursery, half-painted and full of cardboard boxes, I didn't feel dread anymore. I felt possibility. We were creating something new. Something untouchable. And this time, no one would control it but us. The gallery walls smelled of fresh paint and purpose. I stood barefoot in the center of the space, a mix of anticipation and nerves humming just under my skin. The hardwood floor gleamed, still warm from the afternoon sun pouring through the tall front windows. My photographs lined the walls, portraits of wildlife, landscapes blurred with wind and time, small moments of stillness caught in chaos. I had titled the exhibition Uncaged. The irony didn't escape me. The opening was scheduled for 6. At 5:30, I turned off my phone. Not out of anxiety, but peace. For the first time in a long while, I wanted the evening to unfold without shadows creeping in from outside. No calls, no updates, no questions I hadn't invited. By 5:45, the space began to fill. Friends, colleagues, local artists and writers I'd come to know over the past few years. Even a few of Spencer's coworkers, including his boss, who stood in front of a print of a falcon in flight and whispered something like reverence. Spencer arrived shortly after, carrying Isla in her wrap, her tiny fist curled against his chest. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me. He smiled, small, quiet, real. There was still something in him that was rebuilding. But I didn't need all the pieces put together right now. I only needed him to keep trying. Delia and Miles came in a few minutes later, laughing about something. It was strange how much lighter they both looked, as if finally being allowed to breathe their own air had started showing on their skin. They made their way toward me, each hugging me in turn. Your fox photo, Delia said. Gesturing behind her, I stared at it for 10 minutes. I think it's the first time I've really seen stillness. I smiled. That one almost didn't make it in. Well, I'm glad it did, she said, looping her arm through mine. And then, at precisely 6:20, they entered. Margot and Douglas. Dressed impeccably, of course. Her in a dove gray coat, pearls glinting at her neck. Him in a tailored navy suit, polished and sharp. There was no grand announcement, no pause in conversation around the room. But I saw them the moment they arrived. Margot's eyes traveled slowly across the gallery, not with delight, but with scrutiny. She paused briefly in front of a print of a wolf standing at the edge of a frozen river. The caption read, "Alone does not mean lost." She didn't speak. She just stared at it. Douglas, for his part, made the rounds. He shook hands, complimented the work, made pleasant comments to people he'd once looked down on. And in his hand, I noticed something, one of the printed programs for the show, folded neatly as if he'd already read every word. I didn't approach them. I didn't offer a drink or a conversation. This wasn't about them. This was my space. My night. If they wanted to observe, so be it. But they weren't the center. Not anymore. Eventually, Margot approached me. Not directly. She stood beside me as I adjusted one of the frames on the back wall. A photograph of a bison mid-stride through a winter storm. She glanced at it, then at me. "Your work has matured," she said finally. "There's clarity in it. Restraint." I turned to her, letting the quiet settle before I spoke. "I don't create for your approval, Margot. Not anymore." She didn't flinch, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "I didn't come to cause trouble." "No," I said calmly. "You came because you don't know how to not be seen." There it was. The first real crack. A slow breath in. A hand tightening around her clutch. Douglas joined us, nodding toward the bison photo. "We used this one," he said, gesturing. "In the company's end-of-year report. It was well received." I held his gaze. "Respect is earned, Douglas. It doesn't erase what came before." He nodded once. "Understood." They didn't stay long. 20 minutes, maybe. Just enough time to be noticed, to confirm they had not been chased out or diminished. They left quietly, walking out into the evening without a goodbye. I didn't follow them with my eyes. I didn't care where they went next. I turned back to the room, where people were still sipping wine and discussing contrast, light, movement. Where Spencer was gently bouncing Isla, showing her each photo like it was a storybook. Where Delia stood at the corner with Miles, laughing about something I didn't need to hear to enjoy. I stood at the edge of it all, not in the spotlight, but in the light. My own. I hadn't beaten Margot and Douglas by becoming them. I hadn't schemed louder, struck harder, or clawed my way through their games. I had refused to play by their rules. I had drawn a line and stood behind it. And when the storm came, I hadn't run. Now I lived on my terms. My home, my family, my work. I looked at the final photograph on the far wall, taken just after dawn in Montana. A wild horse, mid-gallop, muscles straining, dust in its wake. Its eyes fixed ahead. Free. I stepped closer, letting myself feel it. Because finally, so was I.